We're gonna start recording. Okay, this should be working. So, let's get started. Welcome to the panel. My name is Ty. I'm a friend of Alchi's. I'm very happy. That did not work. Whoop. Okay. I'm very happy to be here. I'll be explaining what Arakai is anyway, time of summary of how we got here. Also, welcome my two panel guests, my two lead designers, I guess you could say, my friend Diana and my friend Mechnomancer, also known as Isaac. Very good friends of mine, here to help me explain the ideas behind the panel. Basically, I'm going to give you a summary of how we got here, a brief explanation of what I believe a homemade TCG embodies, and a few lessons we learned as we went, and there's a little history lesson behind each lesson. So what even is this Arakai? Isn't that like the author from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure or something? Well, it started many years ago when I was a little lad, and I think we've all had this little Why is it doing this? We've all had this little phase when we were a little potato. When we've played trading card games, or we played video games, or we played tabletop board games, we've always wanted to make one, right? We as kids always wanted to make a game at some point. And as a kid, I played every single one you can think of, even the Japanese exclusives like Duel Masters, Battle Spirits, and eventually my current game of choice is Vanguard. I also played competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! I wanted to make my own. So as a kid, obviously, you start writing Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan fiction. Eventually, I got ambitious and realized, hey, wait a minute, if I grow up, I can make this a real thing. So I made a draft for my own game for it. But of course, as you can imagine, as a 5-year-old, they didn't look so amazing. So I went in my closet, I dug these old relics up. For when I was a lead lad. And obviously, this isn't professional grade quality, so I taught myself how to draw for these little Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan fictions I was writing. As you can see here, some of my stuff. But I still needed a game. That's the big issue, right? I still needed a game to play. And eventually, several years later, I enrolled in a game design course out of pure curiosity. I ended up loving it so much, and remember I had a random idea for a card game lying around, and with COVID-19 in full effect, I spent the time writing the first draft of the rules. But I didn't have all the energy or time to make the art. And I think we can all, at some point, not quite go down the same exact path, but we've all at some point wanted to, make our own game. And it's one of the best experiences we can ever have is, playing around with game design. But there are a few things I've picked up over the years that I feel like, even if you're not going to design a game, even if you're just a little curious in game design, I feel like are fun little tidbits to just talk about. So lesson number 1 was don't be afraid to borrow or leave out certain assets. This is something I see in a lot of homemade TCGs or a lot of homemade games in general. Like I ask them, hey, why haven't you started making your game yet? And they're like, oh, I'm really worried about, I don't have an artistic direction, or I don't have pictures for it. And obviously I did not make this art. I wish I was this good. But this picture is something I found on the internet, and I just slapped it on a frame, which I did make. I did make this frame. But the story behind that comes later. And as you can see, I can draw all the art. It's just that I didn't have the time or the energy to get all of it done. So here's one card I made. And I feel like a lot of people get stuck up in, I need the visual design. I need the visual design look amazing. I need to have everything ready when I present it to, say, an investor or a designer that's interested. And then here's another one I made for a card that's coming out. I can't show you. It's a secret. The effect isn't known yet. It's a secret. But my professor told me that game companies or investors will not care one bit about your visual presentation. They do not care how your game looks. All they want is a compelling game. So your first priority obviously needs to be that your game needs to be compelling and interesting. Perhaps your testing group doesn't want to see blank pictures, of course. Like, let's go back to here. Nobody wants to summon white screen. They want to see the card they're summoning. They want to see a powerful dragon, then they put it on the board. And so if you're worried that maybe your playtesters won't be as interested because, our eyes really like pretty colors, no one will blame you for using a placeholder. My professor has seen many times people use placeholders, as long as you show an intent to replace those. So like these arts here, I very clearly plan to have my own art. And so as long as you show an intention to not use stolen art, obviously, it's probably fine to just use placeholders. But once we finally had a game, once I finally had all the cards ready and I made the first draft, we decided to start holding weekly tournaments to test the game out. And this is something obviously that people will start doing. They'll go to their friends and say, hey, I made this cool little card game, or I made this video game, or I made this tabletop game. And they'll say, okay. And they'll say, hey, I want to work this out. And so their friend will go, yeah, that's awesome. They'll want to come support you. The first tournament of Arakai was a complete freaking disaster. It was an absolute hellscape of a tournament, and every deck ever focused around this guy here, Drazari Enlightened Walker. Why is that? Well, originally, this is the current version of the card, but originally when he attacked, he put a free body on the board, and if you play any card game, you know how absolutely busted that is. He put anything on the board. You can put a big scary dragon like the Igneal I showed earlier, or you can put a small little block or a utility. And the fact that he was that open-ended, people would just summon big fatties and, win him by turn 3. This card and several other cards in the deck that this guy was played in were errated or had their effects changed to compensate. And so with the first tournament down, we were like, oh, okay, great. So that problem's out of the way. But then we get to the second tournament. And Diana here won with a super consistent and uninteractive mill deck that basically had no weaknesses. And the deck got hit in the same process we described. And just to give you an idea of how hard it was hit in terms of errata, the deck list you see to the right is probably not playable in the current state of the cards in question. 90% of these cards were hit in some way. And yeah, that sounds pretty busted, doesn't it? So lesson number 2, your game is going to suck really bad for the first few weeks. Your friends are going to tell you, wow, your game is garbage. Or you're going to think, wow, my game is garbage. This is completely normal. People are like, oh, wow, I've made an amazing game. I know this is like, oh, wow, it's super obvious, right? Obviously, your game is going to be amazing immediately. No, but seriously, I don't think a lot of people understand just how broad of a scale in terms of how much it's going to suck your game will be at the start. So, like, that was just first 2 tournaments, right? Like, obviously, after 2 weeks, maybe we figured something out, right? Well, let's go over some of the crap that won consistently by showing the errated versions of these cards. First, we had almost infinite negate attacks using the first card, adding it back with the second card, and then adding the second card back with the third card, and rinse, cycle, repeat. The third card discards cards out of the opponent's hands, it adds back the second card in question, Merlin, and then Merlin add back negate attack, and you just do that over and over again. There really wasn't any way to interact with this, so this got hit. Insert the same thing, but with board wipes. Cleanse the Impure is a one-sided board wipe that destroys all non-yellow or non-haven cards on the field. So, obviously, you have this strategy. All of these cards were hit in some way. Very powerful strategy. And then we get to these guys again. Drazari continued to be a problem. We thought, we just hit him. Why is he still an issue? And his pal Pack Behemoth, which was a card that was used in tandem with him to create basically like 5-6 attack loops. Which if you played any card game, you know how kind of crazy that can get. And this thing, Angler Nymph, which was a staple in like every color ever, and people play blue literally just to play this card. If you've played Magic, it was the same level as Jace the Mind Sculptor. Hand loops and lockdown effects. We're back to the Arai Deshak, the demon guy. Necromancy here is basically Monster Reborn. So what you would do, it used to be Monster Reborn for anything. So what you do is you'd put Megalo, who's a card that can mill and lock down things from attacking, and then you Necromancy back either that or Arai here. And then having these 2 on the board was essentially an instant win. So once again, those got errated in some way. And this is like 5 weeks into the game's lifespan. The most brainless aggro deck in history. This thing was a thing for a long time, no matter how much we hit it. We went on like 2 months of having to deal with this thing. And of course, burn OTK, one of the most infamous strategies in the game's history. Even though it's been around for a little less than a year, people were already complaining about this thing, going, oh my god, burn is so toxic that we had to actually ban, like delete the middle card, Heretical Casting, from the game entirely. There was no way to fix it. So don't feel so bad if your game ends up being the same way. Designing an initial card pool is hard. Because when it comes to designing, you obviously want to design cards, or you want to design mechanics in your game, or you want to design crap in general based on what other things you have in the pool of cards or of characters at the time. But when you're designing an initial pool or designing an initial game, you have nothing to draw context from unless you're basing it off of other games, which isn't a bad thing per se, but you want to stand out. You don't know the rules and mechanics as well, even if you made the game, and you will not make a perfect game in the first few months. No one will. I know that seems obvious, but even nowadays, we're still discovering broken interactions. Like Drazari, the guy on the left here, was still errata again very recently, like a few weeks ago. This is a very recent hit. We're still discovering stuff to this day, but that's completely okay. That's going to happen. It doesn't mean your game is fundamentally flawed. It means that you made a fundamentally flawed game at the start, and it's so easy to fix because you're not an official game yet, whereas a game like Yu-Gi-Oh!, if they release a busted card, they have to ban it. They can't just change the card. And then we move on to set 2. All those cards we just explained were set 1. Moving on to set 2, we see the dawn of this card, Jasmine, who, next to Burn, is one of the most infamous strategies in the game, and the evolution mechanic, but that comes later. The tournaments were all diverse, technically, so it was technically balanced by definition. However, the game seemed to have a draw your outs issue. For those of you who don't play card games, draw your outs is an idea that in order to beat a certain deck or beat a certain strategy, the only way to win is to draw a very specific card. And yeah, it's a card game. RNG variance is always a thing. But drawing your outs is honestly not a good argument for why a card should be in the game or why a card should be broken. Because, well, you have to draw it. It's not skillful. If you draw it, you win. If you don't, you lose. No one likes playing those kind of games. And Jasmine here, in its pre-errata state, was for the longest time in 80% of decks that won tournaments. So maybe there was a bit of a problem. So we as a design team obviously decided that she had to go in some capacity. This couldn't exist in the game as it currently was. So we tried the following changes. We tried making her cost more. We tried making her discard 1 from hand, discarding 2 from hand. We tried making her cost only green or primal cards. We tried making her summon only 1, because for context, her effect was she summoned 2 level 3 or lower, so basically 2 medium-sized bodies for basically free. Maybe 1 medium and 1 small boy. And eventually, the current version is she only summons 1, and we undo all of her other costs and conditions. So it's pre-errata, but she summons 1 instead of 2. So lesson number 3, don't be afraid to experiment a bit, even if you think it will be detrimental to the fun of the game. A lot of time people think, what if I made this game or this mechanic, or I made this character do this thing? And then immediately in their head they go, no, we can't do that because that's busted. Why not? Why can't you do that? Shouldn't you try and see if it's busted? Shouldn't you test it out? There are some other cards we did this with. Discharge Succubus here is a card that originally it became absolutely ginormous for no reason, and there was basically no way to beat over it. The center of everything was not as bad as the other 2 that I've been showing, but it's still a card that required that still required a lot of testing. It did not do any of the things that it currently did on the card right now, and Cursed Goliath is one that just got changed outright after testing some other concepts. But why do this? That seems super dangerous. Why print this super busted card if it's going to break your game? Well, experimenting helps you establish rules for design. Making mistakes and then fixing them allows you to see what you can and cannot design cards or characters or game mechanics for. Sometimes it's a good idea to make a broken card on purpose, in moderation, of course. Don't make like, I cast this, I win the game. No, obviously that's broken. Just to see what happens and to see what's balanced. If you don't have anything to draw context from, sometimes it's a good idea to, when trying to fix a broken card or a mechanic by errataing or tweaking it somehow, take it a little easy to test the waters to see, okay, maybe this is okay and maybe this isn't. Of course, like I said, do this in moderation. Doing it too much can set a bad standard. Like with Jasmine, all the changes we did before, all these changes, I'm glad we did them and we didn't just go to the last one immediately. Because, you see, we now understand that 1 card summoning 2 cards for free, even with the hand discarding and with the overcosted effect, is not balanced at all. It's overpowered. So no matter how expensive or costly we make an effect, we just cannot make a card that puts 2 medium-sized bodies on the board. And I'm glad we figured that out. It helps us, design future mechanics or future cards. And right before set 3, now this doesn't look like the card frame you had before. Don't worry, I'm going to explain that. I presented the old frames to a teacher who wanted to look at the project. This was right before set 3. He essentially said the equivalent of, lol, these suck horribly, but in a much, much nicer way. So with that realization, I spent the next 7 days pulling all-nighters to change the frames and change the names of the colors themselves. And you can really tell the difference here. The fonts are nicer, it's more streamlined, it's not as grainy, it's got its own feel to it rather than just being Magic Clone number 69. Obviously, you can tell that the colors were messed around with, like I said. The art was given more room. The useless triangle on the right side of the original card was just removed. And we even changed the color names from Fire to Blaze, Natural to Primal, Light to Haven, Astral to Tidal, Astral. Astral's the only one that stuck because we liked it. And you can see these name changes here. We even spent time making little nation symbols, which was something for some reason we just didn't have in the original draft of the game. So lesson number 4, be willing to change things that just don't work, no matter how classic or iconic it may be in your head. I thought these were good. At one point, I thought these were good designs. At one point, I thought these were good designs. At one point, I thought these were completely okay and acceptable. That is not the case now. Obviously, looking back, you realize, wow, I was an idiot. But like, as long as you're not like super glued to certain concepts, you can easily make a better looking game as time goes on. That's obvious, right? It really does matter though. Off the top of my head, I can think of the following changes we've made, even though I was really attached to the old versions of them. The concept of element charging was completely removed, and the way that we manage spirit or mana, if you've played other games, was completely changed. PSCT, so problem-solving card text, so the way that your cards are worded, to make players able to who are reading your cards able to understand them a lot easier. Like if you pick up a Yu-Gi-Oh card, even though it's supposed to have PSCT, there's a lot of stuff you're like, oh, okay, that's weird. Much better card frames, obviously, and an actual aesthetic for the game. We've obviously decided that hexagons are really cool, as you can tell by the hexagons and the card effects on the right card here, and the background of this PowerPoint. But another thing we changed was the entire giant insect archetype. This was a deck that was an extremely toxic rush deck. It was killing you on turn 3, not much counterplay. It would deal 10 to 14 damage in turn 2. If you play Magic the Gathering, you know how crazy that can be. And obviously, this meant we needed to play around with it. We had no idea how to fix it. We tried nerfing this card and this card and that card and that card. And eventually, we went, what if we just changed their playstyle altogether? Which was something I really didn't want to do because I was super attached to the original idea of bees. I was really attached to the original idea of the archetype. But eventually, after thinking it over and going, well, maybe it's better if we change the whole thing, I sat down, redid the whole thing, and now this deck is a fan favorite. People love this thing. People are no longer complaining about how toxic it is. People love playing this deck. We have one player who plays this deck like Triff plays Pendulums, for those of you who play Yu-Gi-Oh! And you know what? That's great. I'm glad we figured that out, and I'm glad that I just eventually swallowed my pride and just said, you know what? This got to change. Like, just don't become attached to game mechanics that you have. Too many times do I see people going, but I like this original version. Why? Because I made the original version, I'm just attached to it. Even if you're attached to it, even if you're sad to see it go, sometimes these changes can be more beneficial for the game than detrimental in terms of, oh, I like them. And right before set 5, the format was very fun, and it was fair with all the changes we made. There were no gameplay complaints for the most part, and everyone was having a good time. But there was one underlying complaint on the design front, and that is that all the set 4 decks were rather self-contained. So I've shown a few boss monsters here from those decks. The Dragon Lords, Giant Insects, and Knights, the Star deck, the Fish deck, and the Vampire deck were all pretty self-contained, and there wasn't much room to experiment or mix decks, which is something that people love to do. They love building their own strategies instead of having their deck list spoon-fed to them. And so, they wanted something a little more generic. Like I said, they like messing with the card pool. They like building their own funny decks and combos. As a Yu-Gi-Oh player, though, this terrified me. Mixing is something in Yu-Gi-Oh that a lot of people have complained is too generic and too easy, and that's a completely different discussion, but it's very true that a lot of cards are just like, why are these not archetype locked? So, like in Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm terrified of this. I was like, oh, I don't want to do it, but we remembered Rule 3, which was to experiment. And so most of set 5 was made into generic utility cards that can be run in basically anything. And the set was a complete hit. Something we realized was that the color system of this game allowed you to make generic cards but not have them be completely splashable, because there's still the underlying theme of, hey, if you want to play Rotscale Scourge, or you want to play Cryostasis, or you want to play Alira in the middle here, you have to play these colors. So you have to dedicate a huge slot of your deck to playing cards that allow you to, you know, have the correct spirit in order to summon these. And lesson 5, we eventually learned, listen to your play testers. Be willing to do what they say. Not everyone knows everything about game design, and so you might go, what the heck, why would I listen to them, right? They don't know anything about game design, so why would I listen to what they say in terms of restructuring the game? Well, be willing to put your pride aside and do what the testers think is best for the game. The testers are your players. Your players are not game design gurus. Your players, if you eventually make it big and you have the big publication, your testers will not be game design gurus. You will not have people who understand proper design. And so they're going to have criticisms that don't quite fit. So like I said, don't listen to everything they say. Use your own reasoning, but at least consider it. But these non-game design gurus have brought up the following criticisms. How we deal with errata. We used to errata a deck if it topped and, and not give the meta enough time to settle. They brought up that concern. They brought up concern of how we support decks, which I just explained. They brought up concerns about the power level of a game, which is why bees were changed, which is why giant insect were changed. And they brought up concerns of how we reveal the cards. People like card reveals. People love seeing new mechanics getting revealed. And so all of these things, even though these people aren't game design gurus with degrees or my game design professor, sat down, considered it, and did it. Your play testers, like the customer's always right in retail, your play testers are always right. They are always right. No matter what you say, no, you're wrong. Your play testers are always right. Now, of course, that's hyperbole, but I think you understand the general idea. And here we are now. As of right now, the format is fresh and new. We're actually doing a tournament right after this panel. Not here, but on the Arakai Discord server. And we're taking the 6th set of the game as we speak. A lot of hype is being generated from a coming archetype and deck that we've announced. And the players, based on surveys I've done, questions I've asked, it seems like they have not been happier. They love the game right now, and we're reaching a peak. But there's a bonus lesson. There's a bonus lesson. And these lessons aren't a magical solution to make the perfect card game or the perfect video game. These are simply tips and tricks. Game design is an art. And like most art, it cannot be taught. It can only be guided. You cannot teach someone how to become a perfect drawer, or perfect artist, or perfect painter, a perfect game designer in the same way. The only solution is to play the game and experiment. Play as if your life depends on it. Your love for the game will really show in the long run. People will really notice that you love your game and that you love what you're doing. It takes a lot of work. Yes, it is a huge time sink. But the joys are really, really, truly worth it. This talk will be available on the YouTube if you want to go back or you want to share it to somebody. It'll be on Team Galaxy Brain. I have the link here if you want to take a screenshot of such. I want to start doing more game design talks like this because, I love this field. I love talking about the mechanics of games behind it. I love asking questions. I love speaking about things just in massive debate. I can do entire 50-minute debates on why link summoning is a mistake, for example. But we will be teaching this game tomorrow at 12 p.m. and then playtesting at 12:30. So if you're interested, please come join us. And if you're interested in more game design talks like these in the future, consider just subscribing. Yes, I know, hashtag shameless plug. But I figured people would probably want to see this talk later or share this around. And of course, thank you for coming. As is a panel, I would like to take a moment to answer some questions for people who have them, perhaps.
You're doing awesome. You did a good presentation.
Thank you, Alchi. Thank you, Alchi. I love you. You're amazing. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Even a small turnout doesn't matter. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It was awesome. Any questions? No? All right.
How long did you say you've been working on this card game?
So the game itself, I've been working on since, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, panelists, I believe July of last year. The game in concept, however, has been designed since I was 5 years old.
Yeah, I was gonna say, conceptual-wise, it's been a while.
Concepting's been a really long time, my guy. I wish I could find some of my really old bad drawings, just to show you how long ago this was.
You had one in the presentation.
There was only one though. There was a lot worse ones. But this game, I've only been testing this game since last July. And like I said, we're still learning things to this day. I would not release the game as is publicly. I just wouldn't. There's still a lot we want to test out. There's still a lot to experiment. Still a lot that needs to be done. It's a really long, lengthy process. And even though we've been playing it for as long as we have, I really do think that this obviously is a time sink, and even though we've been playing since July, we'll be playing for a lot longer, a few years in the time coming. But this is something it's my passion. I'm happy with it. I love it to death. And yeah, I hope that answered your question and then some.
Yeah, definitely. It's really awesome what you're doing. Keep it up.
Thanks, man. Anything else?
You should put a link to your server somewhere.
Yes,
That way.
I can actually get the server link right now.
Asking him to plug? Wow.
Shit, I'm getting permission to plug? But I am putting the server in the panel room A text. Here you go.
Cool.
There you go. Reading of Yu-Gi-Oh fan fiction for the late night popcorn. I will, Alchie, if you want me to read some of my old drafts of this, I will show you these drafts. They're horrible. But yes, the server is in the panel room A text if you are interested in joining and playing. And yeah, we will be back here at 12 o'clock p.m. Central Time, obviously. And those of you who came, you're awesome. You're amazing. I love you all. I will see you around later. We have a tournament to go start. So I'm going to go do that and put this up on YouTube. And so I'll go back. If you want to get a screenshot for watching this talk later, perhaps, or sharing with your friends, here you go. Take your screenshots now.
You can put it in the panel room, too.
I can put it in the panel room. Yeah! Here, let me actually take a screenshot there and upload it to panel room A text. Let me go screenshots. And here you go. You can use this link and this channel name if you want to see the channel later, the video later. So you guys are amazing. I love you. My name Jeff, generic YouTuber outro.
Your jokes are funny.
I know Jeff isn't funny, so I know. All right, we have a tournament to go run. I'll see you guys later. You're awesome. We'll be back tomorrow, so be there. Be there if you want to learn how to